Good afternoon. Welcome to Natural Action Radio with Dr. Theo. He's a good scientist and physicist, colleague of mine. And I met Theo back in 2008 or 2009 during water technology development. He's a very interesting guy. He has NMR background for his doctorate thesis with fullerenes and different reactions with light emissions and fullerenes, and he was born on the same day as I was, so we had the same birthday, and I flew over to Germany in 2010 to check out some real interesting technologies he was working on, and he's got a really good wide band take on water in general and all its different applications and uses and mysteries and so on and so forth.
Welcome to everyone who's now at the moment online. I'm Theo Almeida Murphy. I have a double name because my father is from Spain, my mother is from England, UK, but I grew up in the Canaries, which are small islands close to Africa. So I enjoyed the sea, the nature. And now, actually, I'm living in Germany, nearby Cologne. So it's been a long time. I've been away from Spain or the UK. So I would say I'm more German now than Spanish or British. So, well, I was always interested in, let's say, how nature works. Not only the technology, but like basic things, what is light, what is water, what is a star, a planet, those things you learn when you go outside and you try to understand by yourself. That's maybe why I studied physics, and that was the main reason I came to Germany, to check out here one of the best universities and dive into, let's say, basic about physics, mathematics, but I also was interested in philosophy and medicine. So I did quite a good combination. And after that, I went to Berlin to make my experimentations. I think John talked about the fullerenes, which are the so-called buckyballs, because they have this dome structure like Buckminster Fuller taught in the US. So this kind of 3D molecular that was something interesting, where I started then to dig into what is a structure, how do atoms stitch together, and on that way I joined some crazy experiments concerning water, because water is most of the time liquid for our experience. The way we let's say communicate with water, touch water, is mostly in a liquid state. The other states like ice or snow, we of course experience them sometimes, but not that often. And the strange part of water is the vapor or the gas. So I remember studying physics that one message came up about cold fusion. And I don't know if you guys remember, but cold fusion was dealing with water too. So that was always on my desk. And several years later, I heard about the so-called Joe cell. Yeah, there it is.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you see on the left, I don't know if you people can see it. Up on the left, it's open. Usually these semi-spheres are closed, so you have like a ball. But the little one in the middle, it's actually the sphere, and then you have another 3 of them, and they're built in a way that they are isolated. And in the middle, you see a container, and in this container, water is being treated with electricity. It's kind of like 10 seconds on, and 10 seconds off. So it's kind of a pulsing. Very low amperage. We're not just producing oxygen or hydrogen. What usually happens when you put electricity between two metals and immerse them into water. So in this case, what we're doing is charging the water. You see those bubbles? Those bubbles stick to the surface, meaning that something has changed. When that happens, we take out the water and put it inside that sphere, that ball up there. So these spheres have little holes, so they connect with each other. And so when you pour the water in there, all this is filled with water. And then you go now to the picture to the right, and you see a sphere in the car. It's just there in the front of where the engine usually sits. If you do that, something happens strange. Something very strange happens. The car becomes light. You drive faster. You have more power, and the exhausts are pretty clean. So that was let's say my first technological contact with what water in a simple base is able to produce. Of course, we didn't understand what was happening, because people were talking about ether energy, about some tiny particles smaller than hydrogen. It could be protons getting out of that sphere and permeating the engine's metal, and of course affecting the burning rate or whatever is in the car. But my experience showed that the effect was kind of anti-gravity. So this little device affects the mass of the car. It takes some time. This is a Mercedes E200, kind of heavy car and older car. This car took at least 3 days to kind of, let's say, charge. But once that happened, it was gorgeous to drive it. I started to do like here, you see that sphere, that Mojo cell submerged in water, and that water was frozen below zero, so it turned into ice. But if you check the picture below, you will see that there is an interface. That means the sphere, the water around the sphere has not turned into ice. It's where the red marks are. So it's liquid, and it's minus 22 degrees below zero Celsius. So it's very, very cold. So the strange thing is that this kind of water cushion developed. So that means the structure of the water has changed. If you go further, John. So what you can do when you treat water with electricity is a lot of things. You can, on the left, create the so-called HHO gas, which is a synthetic gas. It's not hydrogen and oxygen in the common way we think. That means 2 parts volume of hydrogen and 1 part volume of oxygen. It's not that. It's a mixture. And it's not stoichiometric. And actually, if you analyze it, you have CO2, you have nitrogen, you have much more oxygen than hydrogen, and of course some water vapor. That's what we call now the water gas, which can be burnt, can be used for cooking, can be used for driving a car, can be used for cutting metal. And then below you see minerals. So if you pulse the current in there, in that cell on the left, you can produce a kind of a mud. So that's what you see there. And if you filter that water, you will get kind of a yellowish charged water, which you see here on the right side. With that charged water and those minerals, you can treat plants, They will grow like crazy. They will have huge leaves. You can treat animals. You can treat even your skin. And what these materials do, they charge your cells. So that's why plants get huge and grow crazy. So
now,
incredible.
do you think that are there elements being bred in the water, meaning they're not present from the electrodes, or what do you think's going on there?
Yes, good question. Of course. The cell you see on the right side, it's not a sphere anymore. So don't get confused. It's not the same one we saw before. There are two cylinders. So they're like tubes, two of them. One is a positive and one is negative. And they're inside of this is a plastic filter, water filter container. So that it's just standing in there vertically. And you apply electricity with a pulsing system. And it has to pulse around, in this case, it's around 134 hertz. So kind of low frequency, a little bit higher than what we can hear with our ears. But in this case we're below. It's not kilohertz, it's hertz. So it's between 80 and 134 hertz. So if you do that, you get those minerals. And sometimes it's very funny because you have clean water, the tubes in there, they're stainless steel, they're clean. And after treating this water 20 minutes with electricity, you get this bunch of mud of minerals. And you can do that again and again and again. So I call this machine or this cell a replicator. It's brown. It's not that metallic, so it looks like soil. And it's very, very fine. It's nano particles. You can dry them, and they are ferromagnetic. That means you can use a magnet, and they will stick to it. So nobody knows where all these minerals come from, because if you calculate how much water you have in there, and of course I'm using creek water. It's not distilled water, it's not tap water, it's creek water. You can calculate how many minerals you have. And of course the stainless steel, you can see if it wears off. But if you check that, that's not the case. So where do these minerals come from? So the idea is that they are being created. It's not the first time that we hear about this.
Yeah. I ran into a little bit of the same thing in a number of experiments. So ultimately, what we have here is vibrations in water, whether there's power or not, seem to...
There is not that much power.
Water.
It's actually, you should not use that much power, because you will destroy the metal and you will cook the water. So you have to be very careful not to, let's say, put amperage in there.
Yeah, this is a case where science is starting to head in the right direction, because we see with less power, the quality goes up of whatever it is we're talking about.
And the interesting thing is the both tubes in there, they are very close to each other. The clearance is very, very tight. It's almost less than a millimeter. So between those metal interfaces, that is the magic. There is where the magic is taking place. So you have like electricity, you have water, you have metal, and then you have this creek water with its minerals. So this combined with the frequencies produce this kind of, let's call it soil, very energetic soil and energetic water. Which, as I said, you can use this for growing plants and curing. So that's a side effect of what we were.
You can even breathe this gas And,
Yeah.
there's some implications there. So we see this single substance that now we're in the early stages of identifying a solid state at room temperature of water, frozen water at room temperature with Gahn and Lowe's work, double helix DNA, this plasma gas, and then the liquid water, and all of them respond and completely change their behavior over the conventional 3 phases we were taught. So it's almost like we have allotropes of liquid, solid, and gaseous form. And the uses for this stuff, from medicine to industrialism, is just quite amazing when you look. We have a single substance, very simple technology, but a whole avalanche of behavior and things going on that conventional science using atomism or materialism cannot explain. And I think that's where we kind of, are crossing over with the collective consciousness in our science is beyond, materialism, and recognizing that there is some type of spirit or subtle energy underneath all things, but water seems to be extremely responsive to the simplest of changes, and the tiniest bits of energy can make gigantous changes in its behavior. So we're not talking about power here from the idea of, massive amounts of energy. We're doing less and less and less and paying more attention and seeing more. What does this mean for the future of water and science and our technology to you? What do you see 10, 20, 30 years from now with, these different versions of just water?
Well, if you go further in the slides, I wanted to show something that helps to understand what's going on here. It will answer parts of your question. If you just go further, and the idea of the quantum coherence is that we are dealing with structures and energy. To put it simple, the energy can be something like a sound wave, electricity, heat, different type of light frequencies. And then you need a medium. Of course, you can have a stone or a piece of glass or plastic. In this case, we have water. And water is kind of liquid, so it's moving. It does not have that that structure like we find in minerals or in wood or like a gas. It's something between. I like this the word living water, because water seems to be alive. So this structure is, even if it's moving pretty quick and it's still sticking together in its liquid form, it's capable of absorbing those energies, those radiations, light, infrared, UV, vibrations, as you said, pressure, and all those things. So that can turn water into different states. So in these slides, there is one where you can see that water is a solid, but it's not ice, which is quite amazing. And when you produce that water looks like a neuron, a brain cell. It builds like kind of a nucleus, and then it has those arms like a spider web expanding. Of course, these things are very microscopic, but they can be seen under the microscope. And also, you have structures that remind you of the double helix of the DNA, but without proteins. And what's interesting also is that our DNA has water in the spaces in between the parts of the DNA, and that gives the DNA its structure, its structural strength. But not only that, it helps also the electricity to flow, the electrons. So when you go deeper into that, you see that the water itself, the different states the water can reach, those are the fabric of life. This would mean that in the seas, in the rivers, all over where you have water, life is being constantly created. So this is the amazing part. So you see radiations, vibrations affect the water, but because the water can build structures based on those radiations. And those structures are in the size, they have a size about 100 nanometers. So no one should wonder in biology, if they study the cells and what's inside of the cells, nobody should wonder that it's actually the water and the interaction with different types of radiations of energies that it's building then the living beings, the cells, the microbes, the virus, and so on.
And really that implies that within water, or maybe within all etheric substance, that water seems to be highly responsive to. We're just seeing it more in the water than we see it in, a mineral or something like that, because of its mutability, its ability to transmutate subtly and set up the seed for whatever. It seems like whatever's in the cosmos, and inside of it, embedded, is an alterable, adaptable program that has a foundation and also responds real time. So like you said, the amazing thing, what we're talking about, is this is going on real time all the time, as opposed to a fixed science that says this is how the reaction goes. This is what happens.
I mean, I don't know, John, where you are now. If you are in Arizona and you are out there in the desert, in some place where it's kind of desert, and a little rain comes, really a little rain, and check out next day, all those flowers, all those little green plants, all those hills and roads and mountains are covered with thousands and thousands of little green plants and flowers and so on. So this is what water does. This is the crazy part of the water. It's like like a blanket. It's the basis of any type of life. If it's a bacteria, it's let's say a corn that will turn into a weed or a tree, or it's being, let's say, the container for fishing for animals and all that. So it's even in outer space, scientists discovered pretty quickly that comets, even stars, have the water signature, meaning that water is all over. We're covered with water. The whole universe. So what is this? Why is it like this? So I think this is what we are starting now to understand, that water is not that simple as we thought. It's not just for, let's say, washing our hands and drinking it. It's actually inside us and outside us, and because it interacts with the surroundings very, very, very efficiently. We have all those quantum coherence effects, which are, of course, part of the cells, part of biology. But the interesting part, too, is that water is also part of the technology. There are some interesting technologies I am studying now. For example, what you saw with the Moyo cell, how to use that energy that interfaces between the water and the metal and helps a car to drive clean. Or what this US guy, this Walt Jenkins in Florida, has discovered, that when he nebulizes water. That means it creates very, very fine little droplets, and it mixes them with very little gas, benzene vapor in, let's say, 1% volume. You can run a car with it. So that means that technologically, we could drive engines, whatever engine, with water. But of course, using the proper water state and the proper energizer, meaning the kind of radiation or vibration. If you reach the proper vibrations, you can use water as an energy, as a fuel. So that's one of the things I'm now interested in. Of course, the other thing is how to treat water so it's much more healthy for us, and of course for plants and then animals. So those two parts I'm now, let's say, going deeper into how that works.
Excellent. Why don't you share a little bit about, I remember there was an engine you guys were working with, and, a big concern today, with the engines and this idea of heat fuels is the CO2 production. And so, a lot of people were working on that and using water to help amend that, but you still ended up with the CO2, and ultimately it's not even a CO2 problem, in my opinion. It's that, we take down the forestation, and so we don't have any, photosynthetic conversion, and so it's the oxygen production. That's what the engines consume a lot of oxygen and then produce CO2, and then there's not as much vegetation, especially when you're talking about high-density city populations, to absorb the CO2 and flip it back to oxygen. So why don't you share a little bit about what you saw in the exhaust on the engines you were working on?
Yeah, so maybe before I talk about this, I once learned something about Schauberger when I was in Berlin. I visited friends there, and they showed me a device that produced a vortex. So they were putting water in there, and that water was turning in this vortex, in this kind of tube. And at the same time, this vortex was created, this kind of little tornado inside of the water. They introduced CO2 gas, but very little. And you know what happened at the end? They created oil, kind of vegetable oil. When I analyzed it in a university in Frankfurt, we did the nuclear magnetic resonance, and we found out that it's not olive oil. It was kind of a smooth oil, but it was oil. So that means that vortexing water and CO2 creates fat. And Schauberger already talked about this. That was this Austrian water expert that was very close to nature. So imagine just vortexing the water, and that water is breathing CO2, and at the end you have grease, oil, which is actually what the plants are doing. So that was one step, how to catch CO2, mix it into the water, and create clean oil, which is, of course, can be burned, can be used in diesel engines and whatever. The other interesting part is that anytime you use a certain quantity of water in gas engines or diesel engines, you will always end up with a surplus of oxygen in the exhaust. Very, very easy example. If you drive a car with ethanol, which is kind of an alcohol, and mix water to it. So you have, like, say, 90% ethanol and 10% water. Put that into the tank and drive your benzene car. That car will have between 8 and 10% oxygen in the exhaust. Part is, of course, coming from the alcohol, but the most of it is coming from the water. The engine will run smooth, very clean, and with much power than compared to gasoline. So I was wondering, how is that possible? How I'm getting all that oxygen out in the exhaust and tailpipe? Because imagine all those cars running around, burning, let's say, the ethanol water mixture and spitting oxygen in the back, which would be a nice thing for cities and where you have roads with a lot of traffic. So I met a friend that was an expert in these things, and he made a discovery that if you get what you see in the picture on the right, this activated water, mix that with fuel, common fuel, benzene or diesel. Of course, you need a surfactant to mix them so they don't go apart. And you burn that, you will have even up to 18% volume oxygen in the exhausts. For you to understand, if you have a benzene car, a gas car, you hardly have oxygen, because the oxygen is needed for burning the gasoline and of course burning the rest the fumes in the catalysator. The rest.
Essentially, if the car is running correctly, you have little to no oxygen left at the end of the oxidation process. Yeah. So 18%, that's like what we have in the air. That's
crazy.
Yeah.
In the air we have 21%. So imagine this car showing 18%. So we went to Mercedes, we went to BMW, we went to Volkswagen. We showed them, and every time they did measurements, they thought their exhaust measurement devices were not working properly. So they had to exchange the oxygen sensor, and once they did that and repeated experiment, they saw that they have the same values, and they swapped cars. They got a normal car, they saw the typical values, and then they switched to our car, and they were kind of confused. So there is a possibility technologically to use water for driving cars, and I know that in the US there were very, very, let's say, brave inventors that tried to push it over, but of course they didn't succeed. The same happens here in Europe. It's not that famous. Most of the big inventors dealing with fuel and water combinations come from the US. But the powers to be probably are not that interested. So I try to explain this to the people, that it's possible. And of course, this is an engineering issue for changing cars. There are some things have to be changed, not that much, but once you do the proper changes, you drive so clean. And the crazy thing is that you're using water, a lot of water, for driving the car. You have no rust. So we have to understand that we have enough energy stored in the bonds of the liquid water that can be used for combustion engines. If you check Mr. Jenkins, that's Jinkins in Florida, you will see what he's doing, and that's for me the new Stanley Meyer. Remember Stanley Meyer, the guy in Ohio?
Oh yeah.
That had his water car ready, and that was for me always an inspiration that it's possible. But his system was quite complicated, not easy to reproduce. But that what Mr. Jenkins has developed, it's actually anybody can play around with it and put that in a car.
It's really simple. When that's the beautiful thing about a lot of this is there's no moving parts, and science used to be very science and engineering were kind of one and the same in that we're going to do this, we're going to make it do this, we're going to mix this with that and make it happen. And what we see with water is you just change the vibrations, have a little bit of understanding of it. We're in the early phases of it, but we actually watch the water to be taught. We don't know what's going to happen, but everybody's very comfortable working with it because it's a natural substance that's operating on a higher level of consciousness, so to speak, where you have a trust in what's going on, and we're learning from it. We're being taught by the water about what science could really be like, is really like, that we don't understand. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is there's nowhere... You know, when I first got into this and started to uncover the programming and the mutations, and there was no force to it. It was just observing subtle changes. And when you look, there's really, this redefines medicine, you know, transportation, old and new, most likely. Transportation going forward, as you mentioned, you know, there's anti-gravity effects, for lack of a better word, being described in a lot of these experiments. Some of the stories about the Palladian craft and the whole Billy Meyer, the sheep herder over. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an interesting story. And ironically, when I read that story, he described waveforms and standing waves around the craft, and these were the same types of waveforms that I was recording in the water when we were working with the plasma gas. And so these cross correlations is just mind-blowing when you realize water in medicine, water in industry, water, you know, for old fuels, water for potentially new transportation. Just quite mind-blowing. What do you...
Maybe to catch up there is something that always kept in my mind. There was a monk, and he was thrown into jail. That was in the Middle Ages, and that poor guy in that dark place, he only got hard bread and mold bread and dirty water as a food supply. So when the guards left the room, he got the water between his hands and prayed. And he said that after he finished his prayers, the water was clean. And then he drank it. So when I read that story, I was kind of, wow, this interaction of frequencies of the mind, of our spirit, interacts with water in a way that water becomes pure. So that was for me the starting point for, let's say, interfacing with spirit. This Joe cell or Moyo cell in the car reacts to spirit. If you have someone in the car who is kind of nasty and in a bad mood, the cell loses energy. It goes down. The car becomes heavy. I've had this several times. I even know if someone drove my car and he was in a bad mood, stressed, I always ask, how was the driving? And he says, the car was not that smooth as usual. Then I ask that guy or that lady, I say, hey, how are you feeling today? So this is, as you said, subtle energies. We don't need that heavy machinery or megawatts for treating water and getting these, let's say, positive effects. Even the power of our mind or prayer or positive thinking has a huge effect on water. So that means, like Emoto, when he made those beautiful pictures about ice crystals and the effect of thought and bad words and good words on water, and then making photographs and showing the beautiful crystals for positive thoughts and the not that nice crystals for bad thoughts. it shows that vibrations affect water. And of course, if you have positive vibrations, you are in a higher, let's say, spiritual state that will affect your body, but also your surroundings. And this can be measured. You can really see it on water.
Yeah, Andreas Schultz too has, prayer or thought, intention, water, and looking at the dendritic crystal growth that comes out under the microscope is just completely different. Grander, talks about, looking under the microscope and they can see the signature of the viewer. They know which guy was looking through which microscope in a room full of scientists with microscopes because their vibrations are superimposed over the water. It seems to have many, many layers to it. So what do you think is getting kind of back down to the basic version that most people are familiar with the structured water and vortexing and the transference, all very much the same as what we're talking about here, only slightly different, but we see grossly different effects. But just your everyday kind of Schauberger vortex, intention on the water, all these things mixed together. Give us a little dissertation of what you think is happening in those cases, just for the everyday kind of use of water as a liquid, as drinking it.
Yeah, if we go further on the slides,
what are you looking for?
Coherence, where you see that this fish swarm. You see and then the next one is kind of waves.
Yep.
This is a picture that helps to get the idea of what's happening. So on the left, and in different colors, this resembles different frequencies. It can be sound, it can be red light, yellow light. It could be temperature changes, pressure changes. So you see they're not harmonic. So what happens, what we call the quantum coherence, it means in certain regions of time and space, those so-called chaotic mixtures of different wave patterns and so on becomes kind of harmonic. If you see the picture on the bottom left, it is not that chaotic as the upper one. And then we go now to the right bottom. And this is like a laser. So all the waves are in phase. So you see those different waves, the red one and the blue one, and they are very similar, but not that similar. But there is a region where the blues and the reds have what we say the same phase, which is almost in the upper part where the blue arrow shows. And if you see a little bit below, you will see that they are not in phase. That detector is moving, and if you go to the one where we have those water particles this is crucial here. So you see a kind of a wave in dots. They're like dots, like a sine wave going from the left. It goes up, then it goes down, and it embraces. It engulfs those round parts. So imagine those waves, and now imagine that in between those waves you have kind of what we called those are water clusters. Those are water families sticking together. They are trapping radiation in that little region. Those waves you saw, and then when those waves come together, they are in phase, they produce these spheres. And there is a wavelength. It's symbolized by those dots that below you see 100 nanometers. So it's typical for water to create those, let's say, domains, or in this case, spheres of clusters, and those all together trap the radiation from outside. But it's not just trapping the radiation. They have to be coherent. They have to be like a surfer. They have to be surfing on the wave. So this is the magic. And when water manages to do that, the water gets energized. So you can do a lot of things to energize water. Bring in a prayer, a vibration. Bring in light, sunlight, crystals, structures, etc. Everything that is able to, let's say, create that kind of coherent oscillation. When that happens, your water is in a higher energy state. Really, physically and chemically, is not the same water anymore. It's not the dead water. If we drink that kind of water, or if we use it for plants, for gardening, etc., those living beings will get that energy, which is infrared. It's a vibration. It's different kinds of heat. Depending on the frequency, it could be UV, etc. It could be movement or thought energy, thought waves, a very high frequency. So those things are, let's say, trapped in the water structures. So understanding this basic idea, and this has been calculated by physicists, so they found out the 100 nanometers, and this you could correlate afterwards with measurements. It's quite amazing, because thinking that water is liquid and it's moving and it's oscillating in quite high speeds and frequencies, that with very low frequencies like sound or even vibrations done with steering, for example, you steer the water and you create a vortex, that is enough to trap radiation, vibrations inside of the water structures. So imagine the water flowing in a river, following a kind of a sinus. Or imagine the water dropping from the sky. We call it rain, hitting the surface of a river, of a pond, of a lake. All that is part of the energy, of the coherence of the living water. So now we understand when water is just sitting there and it's not being treated well with movement, with wave patterns, that water will be dead. And dead water, no animal will drink that.
In other words, anytime we interrupt natural motion, the true essence of water is disturbed and steered into what we've conventionally defined it, which is, just an inanimate, chemical, innocent bystander of life, and it's quite the opposite in reality.
Yeah, if you get gunpowder, you put this little bit of gunpowder on the floor, and you burn it, and you have this light and smoke. But at the end, you check it, and what do you see? It's carbon. It's been carbonized. So the energy was saved in the bonds of the different materials that build up the gunpowder. So if you just leave the water sitting there, it will die. It will lose all that energy. It will look like the burnt gunpowder.
Well, and the same essentially happens when you squeeze it too hard or pressurize it too much. Has a similar effect.
Right. Right. If water just flows straight, like in a canal, that water will change its properties, and you will have issues with the water. It will start stinking because algae formation, and animals will not want to be there. The fish and birds and so will try to get away, to stay away of that kind of water. And if we drink that water, we will become sick. So what we have done with that kind of water is we've taken out the vibrations. We've put it in a form, in a way that it's, let's call it natural frequencies, cannot reach the water. And this is a serious thing, because as you said, the tap water is pressed through pipes and so on, which is not the natural way of transporting water. But of course, water is very, very, let's say, liquid. So there's always a possibility to transform that water. So
that's the beautiful thing. Like right now, almost. You know, it doesn't take 10 years to get it back.
Yeah, you can get what we call dead water. You can put it through a stirrer or a vortexing machine, or bring in positive radiations like sound, light, and that water will change. That's the beautiful thing. Knowing this, we can heal lakes and rivers. It's not that hard. We can even I know a guy here in Germany. He gets quartz, which is silicon dioxide powder. He says he puts the oxygen information into the quartz. He puts this quartz in a tube, and he throws this tube in a lake. He just pumps it down, and the days pass, and around this tube that's sitting there in the bottom of the lake, the water transforms. So the oxygen information, let's say the oxygen vibration, gets into the water, and the water becomes changed. And as the water changes, the algae formation, the biosphere transforms. And this you have to really watch it to believe, because it's crazy. This is not the typical, let's say, physical effect that you're pumping oxygen into the lake through a tube or whatever. You are just passing over the oxygen vibration in a crystalline form emanating from the silicon dioxide powder into the water clusters. And that happens in such a tremendous speed that gallons and gallons of water turn into, let's say, energetic water or more oxygenized water in just weeks.
Well, and it's the popularity in, water structuring with using a silicon oxide, storing your water in glass bottles versus plastic, transference of this oxygen function, right, using the silicon crystals, seemingly highly reactive with water. Silicon, I think on Walter Russell's chart, if you look at the different ones, silicon and carbon and water all fall in a musical harmonic.
Right. So Schauberg already taught us this too. He has this chart where you can see the hydrogen, the oxygen, and the silicon dioxide. So he knew what was going on, because silicon dioxide is part of stone. So you have a lot of stones with these silicon dioxide structures, so especially in rivers. So now we understand why passing creek water through all these stones is not only the vortex effect we get there, but it's also the stone vibration, the silicon dioxide vibration.
And that opens the door to what do you want the water to do? You go pick your stuff and interface it with the water, and now you're actually intelligently asking the water to do work in a specific way, not just the general function of water. So really, this opens up the door for anybody and everybody to experiment and play with water. And in my experience, as soon as you enter that mode of consciously interacting with the water, treating it almost like it's a person, like what would a person like or not like here, what would I like or what I wouldn't like, that effect in itself, just the idea that you're interacting with the substrate of life, in a way it almost becomes like a pathway into the divine, but not so much in a religious way. It's just in a very open, mysterious, subtle, gentle way of dealing things, and that's just mind blowing to me, and brings you closer to yourself in a way. And then you realize you're mostly water, anyways. Your brain's 90% water, and it starts to simplify a very complicated world that we live in, no doubt.
Yeah. If you, can you please go further with the?
Sure.
Right. That's it. Because that.
And what we're looking at here, for those of you who can't see and those of you who can, is different subtle voltages out of a cell, a container that has water. And so we're looking at the positive and negative millivolts, or ORP they call it too, right, Theo?
It looks like it. Okay, thanks. You hear me now?
Yep.
Good. Okay, what you see here, because this is, I think people like to know this. So I'm going to explain it. What you see, it's kind of like a symbolic drop of water, but it resembles a cell. Actually, it's you know, when you have a healthy cell, you have a voltage from the inside to the outside. You can measure that. A typical healthy cell has around minus 120, 130 millivolts, which is here in our case the blue water, so going to the right. So you see a heart cell membrane is around 100, minus 100 millivolts. What is the living cell potential? The living cell potential is the energy that you have when you measure from the center of the cell to the outside. So that is like, you know, when you have a fresh tomato, it's kind of you can feel, you can press the tomato, you can feel, oh, that's a juicy tomato. It's not that fluffy. So you must imagine your cells, when they have that high voltage, they are in that state. So when a cell loses the voltage, that means it's leaking. Even the Joe cell, the Moyo cell, when they leak, that means you have a short circuit in there. They leak electrons, so the voltage goes down. This is demonstrated here on the left. You see chronic illness is 0 millivolts. You go more to the left and you have cancer cells which are actually positive, meaning that they don't have those electrons. So drinking or living with high energetic water means that your cells are on the right side. That means you have like minus above 100, 130 millivolts. So the idea is to enhance that potential in each cell of your body. You can do it of course, there are different ways of doing that. You can eat healthy food. You can breathe healthy air. You can drink good water, and all that will keep your cell potential, which means that you will keep higher awareness in your brain, in your spirit, in your body.
It's a momentum wheel that gets going. I have experience with this and work with some folks who work on this. And who is it? Voss out of Germany. Did you ever hear of him? He's the guy who measured the actual voltages all over the body and tied it to Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic. And he made a machine. I've been on one of those machines before, and when you get these chronic diseases, MS, Lyme's disease, diabetes, cancer, Parkinson's, any one of them, it's shocking to see, but it's not a malfunction of the pancreas alone or a tumor growing somewhere. It's literally every cell in your body picks up this condition, and you can see it right underneath a microscope. I could look at my cells and see that they were in the 0 to plus 30 range, and essentially it's similar to a plant where the soil has gone bad and all the nutrients get pulled out of the plant and the plant, and go back to the soil because the electrical state has shifted, primarily in the backwards direction. And once you get into this state, it's very, very difficult to get out of it. Even if you do all the, structured water, good diet, all these things, your body has almost a momentous memory and gets stuck there. But these things, when you synergize them all together, slowly start coming back in the right direction, and you can watch that happen in every red blood cell in your body. So it's very simple in a way because it's just an electrical polarity, an overall thing that happens. And if you get that corrected, things, such as these chronic diseases, whatever they called, have the ability to reverse out of the system.
Right. So that's why it's important to really be conscious about drinking water, about rivers, about lakes, about the seaside. I mean, Mr. Schauberger said that. He said we are moving in the wrong direction. We are turning water into dead water. And he said, that was in the 50s, he said that we will have a lot of cancer cases. And he knew that because he saw people living in cities are drinking dead water. And it's something that you can taste. If you are used to, let's say, energetic water, and water in the countryside, in a creek, or where that water is not contaminated, and you come back to a city and just drink a glass of water there, tap water, you will see the difference. You can even smell it. So it's kind of let's say an education part we have here, that we have to be conscious about the sort and kind of water we use in our daily lives, for whatever, for having a shower, for making a cup of coffee, or just drinking. We should really be conscious about it, because that will help us to live a healthier life. You're showing now this slide. This is I love this. These pictures are done with a so-called atomic force microscope. That means there is a little tip of kind of a material of I think it's silicone or so, and that tip goes over the probe. That tip is like 1, 2, 3 atoms wide, and it goes over the probe, which is very small, and it can scan its form, its surface. And what you are seeing here for example, on the left, is something that looks like a rod, and it's twisted. And if you go to the second picture from the left, you see like it's even more twisted. It's like a twisted spaghetti. And if you go to the middle, you see those, they look like blood cells, but they're not. And then if you go more to the right, that's bulk material. So what you are seeing there is solid water. It's not ice, it's solid water. It's water turned on itself and it has built those structures. So
and that's at room temperature, solid water, right?
That's at room temperature. I think somewhere in these slides you will see the water neuron. Yeah, there you are. Oh, now it's working for me. I can see them. This water neuron, that's the solid water they created. It looks like a jelly type of matter. When they look at it at the microscope, they will discover that it has kind of a nucleus, and then those arms. I call it the water neuron. I think there is another picture, John, where.
Yeah, I think that's a great name for it.
Yeah.
Here we go.
There you are. So, and these, you see the 100 nanometer. So this is the kind of, those 100 nanometers is kind of the nucleus. So we believe that those are the little spheres or blocks. Of course, it's not a pure sphere. We see in this case, it looks like a cell, like a brain cell. Actually, this is so crazy that I would say that water is the CPU base material, like we have silicon for the computer chips. We have water.
Yes, I agree completely.
Yeah. What is our base computer material for interfacing with the rest of what we have in our body, like the DNA and the blood and the salts and minerals. So I don't know if I'm crazy enough, but I would say that these water structures we have in our body are the ones that interface with the spiritual part of us, with that part that we call the energetic body. So I believe that the ethereal or energetic body is depends on the energy of these water neurons. We call this kind of solid water xeros sidereal, meaning xeros is dry, hydro is water, and ile is matter. So it's kind of it's not ice, because that would be wrong. And how they create this, they get a super clean water. It's called milli-Q water. It's even more than distilled water. So it has no minerals in there. So you have this on the right, you see this little container, and then you have a stripe, a membrane kind of plastic, and you just dive it in and stir. They say here, stir liquid and turn over membrane, and you take it out the membrane and let it dry in the air, bring it back, and do that between 10 and 20 times. It reminds me of homeopathy. So that water now on the bottom, that dish there with that little water, it will turn into that what you're seeing on the left. And those structures which cannot really be seen with the naked eye in there, when you go under the microscope, then you see what I call the water neuron. Yeah, this is more bulky. It's micrometers, and this is now getting smaller. So they look like cells, they look like spaghetti. And this is when you go further down to the nanometers, and then you see those. We call them, or I call them. I never heard someone calling it like this, so I named them the water neuron. And the scale you see on the right, there's a scale. So that's the height. They're not that high. It's just that you realize that there is a structure. It's very small. The height is about 1 nanometer. 1 nanometer is an atom size. So
if we carry this over into So back into the liquid water and structured water. This is solid particles, and we talked about this a little bit the other night. We use UV spectroscopy. Gerald Pollack's, got the 270 nanometer easy water, and then our device under the UV vis absorption. Just to explain a little bit, there's a photoreceptor, and oversimplify it, you shine light through a column of water, and whichever light makes it through, that's 0% absorption. But if there's things in the water, the light gets absorbed and doesn't make it through to the photoreceptor. And so with our device in particular, we see around 200 nanometers is the peak. And there's a couple of plausible theories. Do you think it's these water neurons that are in the structured water that are causing the UV absorption change?
Yes, because those 100 nanometers we get here interact in a way that we get that UV signature. Actually, we should get some people work on the structures and do some calculations if we get those 270 nanometers. Yeah, I think it has to do with that. But John, I'm just answering. I see Maria has written, "Hello, Maria. My chat is not working." And Therese, Therese made here a remark that the water neuron picture resembles the. I don't know if you guys and girls have seen those big pictures from the universe where they calculated, or I don't know if it's a mixture of experimental data and calculation, but it looks like the universe. Of course, here you have thousands of galaxies and stars. So, Therese, yes, it's like above, it's below. This is amazing.
Yeah, completely. I think some of the great philosophers and Walter Russell, the only difference between space and water is density. They're the same thing otherwise. One's just less dense than the other. And then to get very tangible, with all our complicated technology that we really don't use, I mean, it's almost like we're living in a world where the technology is so complicated that we think we're smart, but we're overstepping the very, very basic stuff. But we can use that technology to get that hardcore relationship going on where the patterns and the geometry and the mathematics and the music of it all is a very simple, calculable thing. And as we become more conscious, which, drinking the water and talking about these neurons and having your brain function better on a conscious and a subconscious level, really open the door to this simplicity to connect the dots so we don't feel like a little speck in a giant sea and feel really, truly more connected to this stuff on a fundamental level.
Yeah, that's nice that you see it like this, because watching at this picture, I mean, it's really only a picture, but it has some let's say philosophical value. And comparing this picture to what Therese wrote in the chat about that, it reminds her the pictures she has seen from the universe. This would mean that we are connected. This would mean that water is a kind of a mirror of the universe. And we are made out of water. So the connection is there. So without let's say, thinking or using our rational brain, these physicists that did these measurements are actually developing a bridge between the macrocosmos and the microcosmos. And the most incredible part is that the base of it, the interface, it's the water, but not the water as we learned at school, H2O, the water structures, the way those oxygen and hydrogen atoms and with their electrons build up those, let's call them webs or connections. So to be humble enough, watching this picture is like watching the stars, watching the far away where we have the feeling that we came from. So this was the idea that those particles have a certain size, and interesting that small water neurons connects to another one and others, and build those structures that we saw in that glass that it looked like kind of a jelly. So this reminds me the brain or tissue or an algae or even a plant. So it seems that the water with its capability of, there you are. You see those, how they stick together? Those little spheres are the 100 nanometers, and they're polarized. And because they're polarized, meaning some part of it is more positive and the other part negative, they stick to each other. And they can build structures. And now watch this specially. And what I wrote here, note the six-fold symmetry resulting from close packing of spheres. You know how a snowflake looks like. You always have this six-fold symmetry. If you go to the left, you get from the middle, the second sphere. And that's the middle. Then you go up and you travel along the spheres there. You will see the hexagon when it's flat. So now you know why a hexagon and snowflakes are there, because this is the basic structure. Those 100 nanometer little structures sticking to each other and building up the fabric of life, of cells, of snowflakes, of whatever plants. And I don't want to exaggerate, but maybe whole planets and whole solar systems. Or maybe behind there is something like a song, a super coherence, and we are, of course, then connected together, and water is just showing that in its tiny depth. But of course, looking into the skies, then you see the bigger picture. So kind of amazing.
It's certainly water is leading and giving us the hints to go to the next level. So tell us what's next for you. Where are you headed with your own research? What road are you going to go down?
Yeah. What after let's say seeing these connections giving more energy in the cell. So I think this will help for longevity and brightness in the mind. So I think if we take care about the water we drink and the way we interface with water, we will become kind of, let's say, more intelligent, more aware, and at the same time more healthy, and have the power to heal this planet and develop further. That's one part. The other part is more engineering, is using those clusters for engines, for having specific engines that use that power. It's not a burning machine like the typical combustion engines, but very similar. But we're using water instead of using the petrol.
Yeah, and I think that were David Gahn and Lowe, the guys who did the double helix water and the AFM microscope, discovered these pictures that, we're talking 5 micrometers, right? I mean, that's pretty big.
Right.
when you relative.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't going down the health path. They were studying the effects of adding these the reported idea of, I think they were using a platinum nano ion, and they were getting fuel mileage they couldn't explain.
Yes,
And
that's it. Yeah.
Then they realized that this is a normal part of the human body and healthy function.
Yes.
And I believe they think these clusters are formed along the spinal column. Is that correct in their story, that a compromised immune system does not produce these particles anymore along the spinal column? And if you drink structured water, in other words, whether you're doing highly concentrated or whether you're doing, simple,
Yes.
that starts to bring the immune system and the autonomous nervous system back online. So it's that interesting researcher where you're heading down a road, and especially with water, it seems like it guides you over to something entirely, across the spectrum, like building the bridge between the micro and the macro, or going from industrial, like my you and I, when we started, we were very industrial. We weren't talking health so much. We
Yes.
were, and then here we are, 10 years later, and it's become a center of, human consciousness and health. So wonderful journey with water. And, I'll let you give your last few words here, and we'll call it a show. Much appreciate having you on, and, we'll give a quick second if anybody has any hands to raise their questions, but I don't see any at this point. So.
Yeah, that's John. As you said, there is understanding these things have a huge potential in biology, medicine, and I think now a lot of people are now learning this and taking it serious. So I even can imagine, as you said, with the nerves and platinum with water, that those structures will help our immune system, and that the missing of that voltage in the cells means that our immune system won't be working that properly. So there is a correlation there.
And it's a way to simplify health, right? It's the health world, and like engineering and the medical world gets extremely complicated with a lot of pathology and explanations for this one little vein of the neuron, right? But it's the whole neuron that we can address more simply and be a lot more effective. And for me, I guess it's the frustration of the suffering that occurs over overcomplicated systems combined with rudimentary ignorance, and then you get a lot of suffering because of that. And, everybody has the freedom to live their own life and do whatever. But if we can take suffering out of the equation, then it becomes a more enjoyable life and planet as a whole. And it gets contagious, much easier to go in the right direction than to go in the wrong direction. And so that's the beauty of all of going down this water road is learning the simplicity and the basic side of it. Yet it can get as complicated and sophisticated as we want it to be. But there's a good foundation there that we've all been missing, most of us that grew up in the last 100 years, and now it's coming to light. So
and something that, let's say, simple as water, ubiquitous and everywhere, that brings happiness. We know that people that live on the seasides or enjoy a healthy lake, there is more happiness. The plants grow, the health is there. So I believe that understanding this will make us much more happier. So this is something that I think is nice to learn, studying water. So it's a good thing.
Let's do this again sometime and see what's cooking a little bit down the road. And I hope everybody enjoyed the show, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. So happy for joining, everyone. And yeah, well, let's see if we meet again, and I will be happy to exchange some new things.
All right, excellent, Theo. You have a great weekend, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah. Bye-bye then.
Next
Have a
time.
good time.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Cheers.
Cheers.